Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. We're jumping right back in time today to the very beginning of the world's biggest sporting tournament. But listen, we aren't just looking at a standard game of football here. The inaugural 1930 World Cup final down in Montevideo, it was a literal boiling point. We're talking an explosive clash between two incredibly fierce neighbors sitting right across the river from one another, Uruguay and Argentina. This whole thing was just steeped in pride, tactical innovation, and an intense regional rivalry that kind of set the stage for the next 100 years of football history. Okay, let's dive into this with a quote that honestly just gives you chills. Quote, "If there is one game I would not like to remember, it's Uruguay-Argentina in the World Cup final. Yet it always comes back to my mind. It's in my mind. I'd do anything to go back there and play again." End quote. Those haunting words come from the late Francisco Pancho Varela, an Argentine striker who was actually the very last surviving player from this historic match until he passed away at the age of 100. It really drops us right into the visceral emotion of the event, doesn't it? For the guys on that pitch, this wasn't just some shiny trophy. It was the ultimate battle for regional supremacy, and it stayed with them for literally their entire lives. And well, that brings us to the tragic heroes of our story. If you look at Aidan Williams' fascinating book, The Nearly Men, you'll see it perfectly frames this 1930 Argentine squad. See, going into this tournament, Argentina genuinely believed they were the better team. They viewed themselves as the rightful kings of South American football, completely brushing off the fact that their neighbors, Uruguay, were the reigning back-to-back Olympic champions. The Argentines felt all that global praise for Uruguay was totally unwarranted, which gave them this massive chip on their shoulder. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to prove a point to the world, and mostly to the guys right across the river. Section 1. The Trans-River Rivalry. So, why were these two nations at the absolute pinnacle of global sports in 1930? Well, it all comes down to a uniquely South American style called football criollo. While European teams, especially the British, were relying on a super physical, kind of blood and thunder approach to the game, Argentina and Uruguay had spent the early 20th century cooking up something totally different. Football criollo was built on individual flair, immense creativity, incredibly quick passes, and rapid, unpredictable changes in rhythm. Because they shared this highly technical philosophy, both of these squads were light years ahead of their European counterparts. And this brilliantly illustrates the dynamic between the two squads heading into the tournament. Uruguay had absolute global dominance, bringing home gold medals at the 1924 Paris Olympics and the 1928 Amsterdam Olympics. Pretty much everyone universally heralded them as the absolute best in the world. Meanwhile, Argentina held fierce local accolades, winning the South American Championships in 1927 and 1929. To put this rivalry into perspective, before this 1930 World Cup final even happened, these two nations had already played each other an astonishing 110 times. No way, right? 110 times. They knew every trick, every weakness, every tactic. Argentina absolutely knew they could beat Uruguay because, well, they had already done it dozens of times regionally. Section 2. Route to the final. Now, the path to the final was completely devoid of resistance for both of these sides. They both easily won their respective groups. But the semifinals? That's where it gets truly staggering. Uruguay faced Yugoslavia and just completely dismantled them, 6-1. On the other side of the bracket, Argentina faced the United States and won with an identical 6-1 victory. They both absolutely crushed their opponents by the exact same scoreline. If there was ever a moment that proved these two teams were operating on a completely different planet from the rest of the world and were simply destined to meet in the final, well, this was definitely it. Section 3. The 1930 final match. All right, picture the scene in Montevideo on July 30th, 1930. The anticipation was so feverish that they had to open the stadium gates at 8 in the morning. That is a full 6 hours before kickoff. By noon, you've got 93,000 roaring fans packing the stadium, and right before kickoff, this wonderfully petty yet incredibly intense argument breaks out between the teams. Who provides the match ball? You see, they were so intensely competitive that neither trusted the other's equipment. Argentina wanted to use their ball because it suited their playstyle, and Uruguay flat out refused, demanding they use a Uruguayan ball. The refusal to yield on something as simple as a football shows you just how deep the psychological warfare really went. Enter FIFA's hilarious and honestly pretty diplomatic intervention. Their ruling, a literal 50-50 split. Argentina was allowed to provide the ball for the first half, and Uruguay got to provide their ball for the second half. It's a fantastic little bit of tasteful humor in the historical record, but it perfectly highlights the extreme levels of this rivalry. Neither team was willing to give a single inch, literally not even on the leather they were kicking. Let's look at the timeline of the match itself, because the momentum swings are just thrilling. Right out of the gate at 12 minutes, using the Argentina ball, mind you, Uruguay actually strikes first with Pablo Dorado. But Argentina quickly answers back. Carlos Pucel levels it at 20 minutes with a powerful shot, and then Guillermo Stábile gives Argentina a 2-1 lead right before halftime. At this point, Argentina's confidence is sky high. They are 45 minutes away from absolute vindication. But then, the second half begins. The Uruguayan ball is brought onto the pitch, and Uruguay completely takes over. Pedro Sea ties it up at 57 minutes, Santos Uriarte takes the lead at 68 minutes, and Hector Castro drives the final nail into the coffin in the 89th minute. After leading at the half, Argentina suffers an ultimate 4-2 collapse, and Uruguay claims the inaugural World Cup.
Section 4. Legacy and Top Scorers. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer dominance of South American players in the tournament's overall scoring. Out of the top 7 goal scorers of the entire 1930 World Cup, 5 of them are from South America, 3 from Uruguay, 2 from Argentina, and 1 from Brazil. It totally reinforces the idea that the football criollo style we talked about earlier was simply producing far more dynamic, lethal attackers than the rest of the world could handle at the time.
And right at the very top of that list is the number 8. This represents the phenomenal 8 goals scored by Argentina's Guillermo Stábile, which earned him the very first Golden Boot in World Cup history. Stabile's performance is incredibly poignant, actually. I mean, he's shown so brightly, absolutely dominating defenses throughout the tournament, yet his team ultimately became the nearly men. He achieved the highest individual honor possible, but was forced to watch his fiercest rivals lift the ultimate team trophy. Now, the real-world consequences the very next day could not have been more starkly different. In Uruguay, the victory was so monumental that the following day was immediately declared a national holiday. The streets of Montevideo were just filled with sheer euphoria. Meanwhile, across the river in Buenos Aires, all that heartbreak morphed instantly into rage. Angry mobs actually gathered and started throwing stones at the Uruguayan consulate. The result wasn't just a loss on a stat sheet, it was perceived as a deep, agonizing national wound.
Which brings us to our final provocative question to leave you with today. Did this singular 1930 match forever define the footballing destinies of these two great nations? Think about it. Uruguay rode this victory to immortalize their golden generation, forever cementing their status as the first undisputed kings of football. Argentina, on the other hand, had to carry the burden of being the nearly men, fueling this relentless, fiery passion to eventually climb the mountain, which, of course, they eventually would decades later. But you really have to wonder, how might sports history have radically shifted if the second half had gone differently, if that halftime lead had held? It's a fascinating what-if that makes exploring the history of this beautiful game so incredibly rewarding. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope you found these insights as captivating as I do. Never stop asking questions, and I'll catch you on the next one.